We are delighted that you're joining us for another podcast of Wake Up Align, and it is the podcast for chiropractors, where we get to talk about chiropractic lifestyle, and topics of interest. You can contact us through our email, and that is mailbag@amcfamily.com. Welcome back. You are tuned in to the Wake Up Align podcast, and we are here to talk about chiropractic, and really we hope to energize, motivate, and prepare you to have a great week in this career and this service called chiropractic. We're continuing a conversation with Dr. Tara Horrall. If you happened upon this recording first, please look and search for the first one in the podcast library. Otherwise, you're not going to be really up to speed about what we're talking about. But I just want to tell the listeners, Tom, how fired up we are about this, because in between recordings, we're talking about these subjects, and I am ready to go out and shoot somebody for for what they're teaching the students out there. I know I shouldn't say something like that, but my gosh, I can't believe it. Dr. Tara, we're
be
so
careful,
delighted.
Dr. Shannon starting a profile here.
Oh yeah, you never know. So, Dr. Tara, we're just glad that you were able to stay over with us and record another episode. We were talking about something right there before we hit the record button that I think I want to jump right back into with you. Tell the listeners what we were talking about and share that story with them that you were sharing with us, if you don't mind.
I'm going to try to do it in the most PC way possible.
Fair enough.
But we're talking about what students are being taught, right, in the schools. And I have thousands of chiropractors as Facebook friends and thousands of chiropractic students. So I see what's out there. And these are not just aligned members or former aligned members or people with great philosophy. I have people across the board in chiropractic as friends on social media. And the other day, I happened upon a post by someone who I know is teaching other chiropractors at schools or chiropractic students at schools and other chiropractors the amazing awesomeness they feel is being a mobile chiropractor. And you and I have talked about, how that can be done and it can be done well.
Right.
But these people are out teaching students that this is what they want to do. This is the way you should run a practice. And then they post on social media that their first quarter in business, they collected $500.
Now, you said that's collected. That's not net revenue.
No, that is collected.
Gross receipts. Okay.
I could read it if I had my phone with me. I screenshotted it because I was so shocked.
For sure.
And then second quarter, they doubled. Look, I'm not here to rain on anyone's parade or pick on anyone. But to go and teach students that this is a model of practice that they ought to adopt for their success and the livelihoods of the chiropractor, the chiropractor's family, and really overall those patients. Honestly, my mind was blown. I was speechless. Because I don't know about you, when I came out of chiropractic school, my student loan payment was more than that collections per quarter. And I can't even imagine the overhead of a practice like that. But that's why people go into practices like that, because they're told that it's a low overhead situation. And so, I mean, I look at that because we talked about in the last, our last conversation, when you talked about CVA and you just brought the logic to it, right? There are emotional reasons why people are going this direction. It's because They think they can't afford to pay rent. They don't want to have staff and the difficulty that comes along with staff. I can't even imagine what the other reasons are. But these are things that take people out of this profession. Just take them out from the very beginning. Because if your concept is that, well, people won't show up at an office and coming up with staff is so difficult that I'll never find anybody, so why even bother? And I should do all this for $50 to $60 per house call. Look, there's concierge doctors. And then there's that. Right? Those are two completely different models. But they're not being taught the model that would make that a profitable business. They're being taught, this is the way to do this. This is a thing you should do to keep your overhead low and to get scratching. Just get started. Look, folks, I'm here to tell you I'd rather a right starter take way longer, months to open and do proper marketing, have the right location, have a great build out, and really put in the effort and then open, than to just get started doing something, scrap away, and to end up failing, or that feeling of constantly being down, if that makes sense.
Dr. Tara, I'm all for people following their dreams and, stepping out in new, innovative ways and, testing the waters. I have
Sure.
no problems at all about that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of that dream and at the end of that stepping out on something innovative, you're never going to outrun the arithmetic. Now, I just Googled, as you were talking, I Googled student loan payment per $100,000 borrowed.
Mm-hmm.
The student loan payment, the standard payment for a $200,000 student loan is $2,322 per month. It's $3,483 for $300,000 borrowed, and almost $650, $4,644 for $400,000 borrowed. Now, I've talked to some students, and I know that a single DC graduating, not a married couple as doctors, their student loans are somewhere between $300,000 or $400,000. If you are a student and you are considering that new, innovative, novel approach, please understand you got $400,000 coming off the top before you make a dime, and that's called student loan repayment. You're not going to outrun that math. I'm sorry.
I think
Go ahead, Tom.
a couple of points that she brought up and along on those lines is what would make somebody choose that route. And she used the term, it's emotion, right? Because any reason, in fact, when you look at the statistical factors, you would never take that track. Why in the world would you go that route? You're going that route because of fear of, well, it's an easy way to get into practice. It's low overhead. But it's not low stress, right? And the math is not there. So again, you typically don't make great decisions when emotional factors are in play. That's a fact. That's a rule. Here's another thing is, even if you could make the math work, okay, Dr. Shannon, this comes back to model of practice. And I've got lots of stories on this one. I can take up some time, but even if it was a viable option, which realistically it's not, okay, Dr. Shannon's math just showed that, because he's saying $4,000 for the student loan. Well, what about just the cost of living? Where's that coming from? But even if the math worked, you've got to go back to, is it replicable? All right. So you get that one person out of 100 that can make that work, that can figure it out, that happens to be doing it in the right market with the right income ratio that's in the area, all those factors, right, that could come into play that would make it work. Then what if they don't have those components? What if they don't have the structure? What if they don't have the personality? Mm-hmm. What if they don't have the communication skills? All those factors that come into play that make a model of practice work to begin with. So I remember a story, and I know we just quote Dr. Owen a lot. I got my own stories, but I do remember Dad talking about, Dad replicated a model that worked with thousands and tens of thousands now chiropractors, right? And then there was this one model that he was up at a award ceremony, and this doctor was sitting next to him, and this guy had this chain of clinics, and he had a way of doing things, and the staff and their presentation, right? It just looked like a good option. It looked sexy, right? And Dr. Owen up there, as you guys know, conservative, he wasn't brash. He's sitting up there, and the guy is just taking in all the awards, and Dr. Owen leans over and says, yeah, but Chad, you can't replicate this. It's all great for you, but you can't replicate it. And Chad's like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, ask my 10,000 kind of thing, right? The point is, it's not replicable on a broad scale. And what scares the heck out of me of what you said, Dr. Tara, it's not that that's out there, because that kind of stuff's been out there for 40 years. There's always been these odd models of practice. The box on the wall practice. I remember those. What was that? That's fear. It's the only reason you would ever put a box on the wall and pay me what you think it's worth is because you're scared of confrontation. So these weird models have always been out there. But what scares me, Dr. Tara, is back to what we covered on the last time we had you on the show, which is concepts. Mm-hmm. And that is being shared and taught on campus to that fertile ground that's ready to take in seed, let seed take root. Concepts of this is a possibility. Students are hearing about this. That scares me, because that is a lose model. The patient loses, the doctor loses, and frankly, chiropractic loses. Mm-hmm. So that's a lose model across the board in my mind, because that's never going to increase the value or the image of chiropractic. In most cases, let me just say, I shouldn't use the word never, right? But in most cases, that's not going to be a viable option for anyone.
Dr. Tara, I know that we have other things we have to talk about, but Tom and I always try to give a shout out to doctors who are doing well and that kind of stuff. There is a doctor in our group who started off as a mobile, and this fulfills two things. It gives more reinforcement to what you guys are sharing, and it gives us a shout out moment. We know and love Dr. John Hodnett. For the listeners who don't know who Dr. John Hodnett is, very successful chiropractor out in Lubbock, Texas. Great heart for chiropractors. I mean, you're not going to find a bigger heart. You might be hard pressed to find a bigger fella, by the way, but he has a partnership practice. They have about 10,000 square feet, serve a lot of patients in that facility. Dr. Hodnett is looking to expand his office. He's looking for land to have a bigger facility because they have a need to serve more people. So that's just a great shout out for that office in Lubbock, Texas. One of the partners in that office is Dr. Jonathan House. Great guy. Started off as a mobile chiropractor, now has a very strong clinic or practice inside of that partnership. I've never heard Dr. House one time say, boy, I sure do miss mobile chiropractic. Now, it might be the greatest thing since sliced bread. It might be somebody following their dreams, but I just don't see a lot of people going back to it. once they have a better option. So, Dr. Tara, do you have anything else on it? I know we're very passionate about this. We all have a lot to say, but any final thoughts on your side?
Well, and isn't this the reason why, or one, not this particular reason, but isn't helping other chiropractors the reason why Dr. Owen had his first associate within, 30 days of opening? So when I think about our members who embody that same heart for other chiropractors, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Tyler Edge. Dr. Tyler's been open, I apologize, Dr. Tyler, year, I think, and some change. And, he's looking at, he has a preceptor now, Dr. Dalton Brewer.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're looking at the possibility of Dr. Dalton being in that practice. Not because Dr. Tyler has a need to really at this point yet have another doctor in that office, but because Dr. Tyler has the heart for raising up future chiropractors, and he'll tell you it's because he was poured into by Dr. Amy Rudder and by others in this profession before him, that he wants to pour into Dr. Dalton. And I don't think he had the opportunity to ever meet Dr. Owen, but I know he and Dr. Owen would have been good buddies in that regard.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Dr. Tara, it seems to me that some of the motivation to go to these unconventional pathways in career are some of the same motivations that push people into bad associateships. And you mentioned on our first recording, by the way, if you're coming to this recording and you didn't know we had a first one, please search that out. But you mentioned on our first recording that they're actually instructors, professors are actually encouraging and telling the students to go to associateships. What are you seeing with the typical associateship practice out there? What are you seeing on the aftermath from people in those less than ideal arrangements?
Oh, my word. Across the board, I see broken people. But
you said broken people?
Broken people from a lot of these associateships. But once they're given and taught proper concepts, they thrive in their own practices. Dr. Jose Hernandez and Dr. Nicole Hernandez, a great example of that in Ankeny, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
They were associates during COVID and both lost those associateships and opened their own practice. Found that they had a lot of concepts that had been created in those associateships and from other systems that did not fit to create the scalable practice that they wanted. Worked very, very hard every week battling those concepts of money and staff and procedures and principles. I mean, just absolutely doing battle and have come out on the other side consistently collecting more than $50,000 a month. Again, it's not about the collections. Those guys you will not find kinder people with bigger hearts for chiropractic and for their patients and for their community and for their family than the Hernandezes. But it's been inspiring to watch them go to battle with those concepts and those habits. The number of times that he said, well, that's just the way we did it before in the practice that I was in, or we gave that discount or, whatever it was. Those are things that these people have to do the hard work to reprogram within themselves. And when they do, they thrive.
But if they don't know it's an option, and I'm not just talking to the students or the associates out there, I'm talking to every chiropractor listening. If you're not willing to do the battle, first of all, so many people don't even realize they've got the problem, right?
Agreed.
They don't even recognize that that's a limiting belief or a concept that's holding them back. But first and foremost, you got to be willing to do the battle. You got to take it to it. But what you just said, like, well, that's how we did it. That's that's how I was taught, or that's what I saw, or that those are concepts. So many people constantly say, well, what's a concept? I don't understand what you mean by a concept. You just used the term, you don't understand. And a concept is a limiting belief, or it's a belief, right? All concepts aren't limiting belief, but concepts are a belief. And here's a question that we can pose to the audience and to you. Is a belief true? Is the belief true? And I can tell you that for every listener, the belief is true to those that believe it. But it's not your truth, Dr. Tara, and neither is it their truth. Neither is it Tyler Edge's truth anymore. Neither is it Shannon McMutry's truth anymore. But as long as you're out there on an island, and I'm talking to you, I'm not talking just to the students. You're out there, you're listening, you're like, what are they talking about? I don't understand how that could be different. That's your truth. Not my truth. It's not the reality, right? That how many times I've heard of, I remember somebody I respect very well right here in Jacksonville, was out to dinner with them one night, and look, it's a different route. We could go on another show of different models of practice, and chiropractic versus functional medicine and functional therapies and nutrition and all these components. But they sat there with me at dinner that night, and they said, "Well, I've got to go this route. I love my upper cervical work. I love chiropractic, but you can't make a model of practice. You can't do well. You can't prosper with just the chiropractic model." Now, I'm just sitting there looking at him going, see, that's your truth. That's not my truth. And neither is it the truth of the thousands of offices that I've influenced and had my hand in, right? But as long as he believes that, and as long as he's not willing to unpack it and challenge it, that's going to be his truth. And now what's he doing? Maybe he's making money. I'm not saying he's not, but I can tell you, I was looking into his eyes that he wasn't happy. He wasn't enjoying it. He wasn't fulfilled. He desired to be the chiropractor rather than chase the shiny object that he saw as the only way that I can function in this profession. So anyway, I jumped in on that, Dr. Tara, and went, but everything that you just talked about was wrapped up in those concepts and those limited beliefs. And what you were saying is they're willing to challenge it, right? You've watched them work. You use the term every week. They're willing to say, well, I wasn't taught that, or that's not the way we did it. And if you're not willing to do something about that, you'll stay right there. You'll stay right there and keep dealing with those same results, those same experiences. But those that are willing to do the work, those that are willing to jump online right now and make contact and connect with a group like Aligned and find out, I'm willing to challenge some of these thought patterns. I'm willing to, if you're willing to jump in and investigate and willing to look at it from different perspectives, your results and your truth will change.
It's the humble and teachable that Dr. Shannon talked about on the last episode. Oh, Tom's pointing to himself. Tom talked about on the last episode.
Right. I don't ever get any credit. How many times have they quoted Dr. Owen and I go, That's not Dr. Owen's quote. That's mine. Is my 40 years in the profession not worth anything?
You poor thing.
Yes, I am. Yes, that's me. I'm looking for sympathy. Yes.
I will not seek or indulge in sympathy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for quoting me. That's great.
Was that you?
Probably not, but oh, that's good. Good stuff.
Dr. Tara, do we have time, you think, to just touch on something that I've recently heard about that is a problem for students, bad concepts, even maybe extending into the profession outside of new graduates, and that's the misunderstanding and the mischaracterization of what is a care plan or just a structured plan of care for your patients. Are you running into any of that at all?
I can already tell you that's a whole nother show, but we can see if we can unpack that. Go ahead, Dr. Tara.
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. You wanted me to actually say more than that, right? Yeah, there are a lot of groups, both technique and otherwise, that are speaking against putting together plans of care and presenting those to people, which I find to be, in my mind, it's nonsensical. It's all that I have ever known in successful practice. Look, the unsuccessful practice that I was in, we didn't do any of that. There was we told them, 3 times this week, 3 times next, whatever. But yeah, we never did any of that. And I think that's one of the things that pushed me towards it, right? Is because I saw what happened in my mind, the organizational difficulties and the concept problems of the patients, the expectations that the patients had or didn't have of care, one way versus the other. But as far as what they're being taught now, yes, there are many who are speaking against it.
Do you know why they're speaking against it? What is their rationale, or do they have a rationale to speak against it?
I'm really not sure, to be honest with you.
Don't know. Mm-hmm.
I haven't explored that quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it's out there. And what I find interesting about it is when you have conversations with these students or with doctors who've been taught this concept, they're still giving patients recommendations. They're still saying, if I look at a set of x-rays, they have phase 1 degeneration, they're still giving them some sort of timeline. They're telling them they need to come for 3 times a week for however long. Well, nowadays 2 times a week or 1, because we're really uncomfortable telling people 3 times a week. We could go onto that bandwagon if you'd like. But I think it comes down to, from what I've seen, a fear of rejection, right? A fear of those care plans not being accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think there is any other real logic to it. We all, as doctors, as practitioners, we have an idea in our mind about how long it takes to accomplish what we want to accomplish with a patient whenever they walk in the door. That's standard of care. The only difference is putting that down on paper, going over it with the patient in advance, and then being willing to hold them accountable to it through the rest of the care plan.
That's surprising and discouraging. I kind of had a hunch that it was going to be a fear-based issue. And what's so discouraging about that is, and listen, I hope this podcast lives on in perpetuity. I hope there are people who are listening to this 20 and 30 and 40 years later. The reality of presenting a plan, basically going from a verbal recommendation to writing it down, is this. If the patient says, well, I can't do that whole plan. If the patient says, oh, that's too much, or this is whatever, you can always default back to something less if, and here's the big if it's appropriate to do so with that patient. So it's like most fears, right? False evidence appearing real, FEAR. If the whole care plan issue is a fear of rejection from the plan, then there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Because it's not an issue in the day-to-day relationship with that particular patient. Now, somebody may say they can't do the plan, they can't do what you recommend, and you may have to not provide care for that patient because it's too risky. It's not in their best interest. That's what being an ethical provider is all about, right? You have to do what's in the patient's best interest, even if that means it's not in your best interest. But that's very discouraging to hear that there's just a lot of smoke and a lot of fear behind that ridiculous recommendation.
I think the other option from what I've heard is that it makes us all about money, right? Which we know is not at all the case. You're going to collect money from the visits as it is, right? To me, it seems less ethical to string a patient along, not tell them exactly what to expect, not to give them clear expectations of your care, not to tell them what that may or may not cost. And that's more detrimental to that relationship and to that patient's care than telling them on the front side.
I think it's interesting from a standpoint of value, if I can jump in here for a second, because I've heard the same argument, the same discussion for years, obviously. Can't be around it and not hear it. A lot of times that'll come up in the technique groups, right? Specifically. And I've always thought of it just plain value. I'm just the common sense cat, right? Well, if you're so good, why are you so cheap? You know, if you can do what other chiropractic can't, and you're going to adjust it, and you can be the miracle worker that walks on water in 3 to 4 visits where it takes someone else 30, then why is the value not any? The value should be the same is what I'm trying to say. Whether it took you 30 visits or 3 visits, how is that value any different to the well-being of the patient? And that kind of thing also leads back to a principle of, which is kind of what you were alluding to. When you're saying, well, why don't we just be honest and upfront with the patient and let them have an idea? Because what you're talking about is a structure of relationship. There needs to be a structure to relationship. There needs to be a structure within business. It's fine. You know, when you have a life that has no structure, you're going to get out of balance real quick, right? So that structure is that lack of structure. When you're not willing to provide that to the patient, doctor-patient relationship, that relationship's going to get out of balance and going to end too soon, which goes back to the stats that shows the national average of how long a patient stays with a chiropractor. You throw everybody in the bucket, all the best techniques and the worst techniques, you all get in the same bucket, and you end up with a 6-visit PVA. Well, I'm sorry, there is a business side of it. You're going to struggle financially unless you're doing some crazy diagnostics, or you're charging an astronomical amount per visit, or you're doing some kind of a specialized therapy component in that 6th visit. You're going to struggle financially, right? And we're not going to be known as a profession to get sick people well. How do you get yourself into that pain model? How do you get into that pain? That's all you're good for. That's how it happens, folks, is you have no structure to begin with. So the relationship has no chance to be prolonged for people to see the benefit of what chiropractic really can do, which is why my mentors were chiropractors to begin with. Obviously, you guys share in the mentors with my father, Dr. Tom Owen. Dad wasn't a chiropractor because of neck pain. He was a chiropractor because someone saved his intestines when he was 18 years old. A chiropractor. He's a chiropractor because he had crossed eyes at age 6 and a chiropractor in Cocoa Beach. And he had no he straightened his eyes. He was 87 years old and still using those intestines when he passed away. I go on back to Gonstead, the Dr. Bill Harris, the Boutwells, Jim Revels. These men and women were chiropractors for something so much more than that, right? And it was on wellness care. Make no mistake about it, man. People quoting Gonstead in particular. Man, I grew up with Gonstead. Gonstead had a blood lab in his office. Gonstead applied nutrition in his office. And Gonstead would see you. I mean, for God's sakes, we would fly up there and we would be seen 3 times a day for a week. 21 visits in 1 week. That's the reality of my experience with that. So anyway, I can get on a soapbox and go with that for a long time, but I had to jump in there on the lack of structure is again, I look at it as win-win deals. That's a lose-lose-lose deal. Chiropractor's going to lose. Patient's going to lose out on lifetime chiropractic, and ultimately chiropractic loses out. I know we're against the clock, Dr. Shannon, but do you have anything to share as we close up?
No, I'm still reeling, just trying to process, unfortunately, what's being recommended out there. I'm insulated, Tom, because all I know is what we do, who I work with, and it's kind of heartbreaking to hear what's happening out there because I'm oblivious to it. The doctors I'm working with, we're setting records. We're setting all-time records.
It's only heartbreaking if they don't end up here. That's
absolutely true.
Can we wrap that up real quick? You just said something that you said the people I'm working with are setting records, which would lean a listener that tends to struggle with this discussion to, well, it's all about the money. You're talking about records with the money. Hey, doc.
Not necessarily.
Hey, doc. Pull your head out of your tail because these doctors you're talking about, what kind of practices do they run, Shannon? They run self-sustaining referral-based practices. Their patients are referring nonstop, right? Because the patient values and respects what they're receiving. So that's the truth of the matter.
Amen. Well, we do appreciate, again, your time with us. Been a very good couple of episodes. I'd like to have you back in the future. I'd like to explore some of these things we didn't get a chance to get to today. Listeners, as always, you can contact us through mailbag at amcfamily.com. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your critiques. Fortunately, we haven't had any of those yet. We want to hear your encouragement and your support, and certainly questions and ideas for future shows, questions about what you're dealing with, and you can even send those anonymously or ideas for future episodes for podcasts. Until we talk to you again, this is Dr. Shannon McMutry signing off for Tom Owen and Dr. Tara Horrall. Be blessed and be a blessing to others.
And one more thing before we go. If you're a chiropractor who's searching for a better way to build a more sustainable, low-stress practice, then you can contact us at amcfamily.com. You can schedule a discovery session, or you can access any of our free content, webinars, podcasts, and the like.